Now we're going to do this one a little bit different. As I get older, like many people who game or just, you get older, your hobbies kind of sort of stand still in time, or they have very, very, very small increments of growth, barring few exceptions, usually in a live action situation. For movies, you get a remake or you get a continuation where the characters are getting older or the cast is completely replaced. For video games, if they're popular enough, they're essentially immortal, or they exist as long as there are humans to create media for which they can be represented in. Video games are a little bit unique. They can choose where they want to be. You could have a game starring a character that goes into the hundreds and they essentially barely even age a full year or maybe 2 years or maybe no years at all, because it just resets every single game to a different iteration of the same characters doing different things. Or they can grow old, have a sequel that is carried on by their successors and their lineage, chronological and genetic lineages. Listen, I'm not going to start off by saying every little thing that happened with the voice acting situation. But here's what I will tell a lot of people, whether you're on one side or the other. You're equally valid until you start becoming pricks and assholes to one another, okay? There are legitimate reasons why you can have a problem with what Helena Taylor was asking for. And there are legitimate reasons why you can have a problem with what the Bayonetta budget was willing to, give her. So for part one of this video, I'm just going to come out and say it. I want an overhaul of the entire combat system. And I don't mean what buttons do what. First and foremost, I've always been of the mindset that Bayonetta needs to have customizable buttons. For those long timers who remember that I share a Twitter, when I was in control of it during one point, I went directly to the likes of Hideki Kamiya and Platinum Games and mentioned that, hey, listen, can you please consider getting customizable control options for Bayonetta or the Bayonetta franchise? I was initially met with, I believe, Kamiya telling me there's no point. The controls are perfect and they're meant to be where they're meant to be for reasons, something of that nature. It was a surprisingly PG-13 comment from him. Yeah, well, here's the thing. That does not take into account people who have arthritis or possible disabilities or maybe playing permanently disabled or something of that nature is what I said. And I was met with, oh, in that case, there may be considerations taken in follow-ups. Now, I left it alone at this point because we all know you can fucking patch that in. You can patch that in. However, around this same time, at least for the Nintendo Switch related versions of Bayonetta, Nintendo introduced a firmware update that allowed people to permanently rebond buttons even if the game itself doesn't let you. Yes, I did utilize it. So please just let us get that customization. Now, the second overhaul is a little bit unique. So we now have torture attacks, which are the equivalent of the Ninja Gaiden Oblivion techniques, a move that once activated is meant to essentially wipe out a minor character on screen. And then we have the Demon Slave or Demon Control, where either the demon can fight based on direct commands or it can fight autonomously and do whatever the hell it wants on screen. I do not hate these options. However, the problem becomes when the game essentially, the screen turns to mush. Okay? Resolution drop, FPS drops depending on the area. Listen, just scale them down literally. Bayonetta's instant kill stuff, okay, you can keep them. You can make them have some funny little magical animation thing that tortures and kills an enemy. But look, make the sequence quicker and make them very, very quick and easy to do. I shouldn't have to tap a bunch of buttons while I'm almost in the middle of a high intense combat situation. Now for the Demon Slaves, again, I'm okay with the finisher elements. I would rather them come out at the end just like an Astral Chain, okay? That's where I'm getting it from. I would rather them come out at the end of a maneuver or the start of a maneuver. So essentially they replace the hands that come out or the feet when Bayonetta uses Madama Butterfly. You can literally switch them out, creating different possible effects. That's how they should be utilized. because I'm telling you right now, one of the cool things about Bayonetta, and also to a much more inclusive extent, Ninja Gaiden, is that they know when to pull the camera a little bit out, and they know when to bring the camera in. And well, Ninja Gaiden, they also love and know when to use the camera against the player. Bayonetta, they don't do that last one. But listen, the bigger the demon, or the more is going on screen, the further the camera pulls out. And these demons are essentially two different characters. So you have Bayonetta, and then you have the demon she's controlling. So now my attention is divided because I have to make sure Bayonetta doesn't get hit, and I have to make sure the demon isn't getting too hit or being out too long, because not only can a demon get hit, but also it's essentially on a devil trigger timer or a berserk timer. Let's call a spade a spade. It's a berserk timer. It's almost like they're offended that they're kicking ass and they're going to turn on me. We all know this. That's how they work. Here's my problem. As I've stated, this system is not the issue. The problem is the scale at which they tried to do it on this system, which is why I want that alternative system. Now, when it comes to the basic characters combat, I like what they were trying to do with a skilled technical flowchart that you purchase into, much like Devil May Cry. However, I would like it if they took a Ninja Gaiden approach. Now, for the uninitiated, because, Ninja Gaiden was Soulsborne before Soulsborne and, twice as fast. What Ninja Gaiden does is it gives you access to a fragment of a character's full technique and combo list. And the more you upgrade the weapon, you get to the full one until you get to level 3. And in one rare occurrence, 4 with his default weapon. Do it with Bayonetta. That way, you encourage people to use more than the same 3 or 4 combos who aren't just combo masters and combo addicts who are going to explore what everything looks like in training and practice mode. You're giving your player a reason to do something besides what they're built into. Because Bayonetta's enemies are notorious for not scaling with what they're being hit by. If I tap, for example, in Bayonetta 2, if I tap the punch button with the bow and arrow weapon, which quite literally just shoots a bow and arrow, it doesn't matter what difficulty I play on. None of these enemies, barring few exceptions, are going to block it or dodge it. And even then, they're not going to block the whole thing and dodge the whole thing, because Bayonetta's enemies are kind of sort of the worst, except for 2, which apparently people had a lot of problems with being able to counteract the player. And Ninja Gaiden, traditional enemies and bosses are at a bare minimum half as dangerous as the player at all times, primarily because Ryu doesn't actually grow or gain defense. In fact, most of these characters do not actually gain defense in this type of action game, the beat 'em up hack and slash style, because they just don't. Someone decided that they shouldn't, and they don't. The closest we have to true defense is Dante's Royal Guard style, where he can negate defense, or he can essentially fight through it by doing a block. Still takes damage. So, when you have a system like this, your characters are basically Dynasty Warrior powerful grade characters with enemies that, much like the Dynasty Warrior enemies, cannot compensate. However, when you get to the bosses, that's when you start to notice things. Now, we're not going to go into the bosses right now because we're just going off the basic system overhaul. But let me say this real quick. The creativity of the bosses is not something I would change. In fact, I think Bayonetta in particular has the most creative bosses out of what I like to call the big 3. Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, and Ninja Gaiden. I should probably finish up that video I tried to do about all 3 of them and comparing them like 5 years ago. Yeah, I'll get around to that eventually. Look, Bayonetta's weapons also need to have the return of the mix and match. For those who ducked 3 because, well, they heard the story was bad and they weren't involved in the incidents that ensued with the voice actors, or maybe you were, they took out the ability to mix and match hand and foot weapon. In fact, they even took out the ability to properly have to search for these things. Here's what happens. You go to a stage, and at some point in time, you get the weapon. 4 copies of the weapon. Or I'm sorry, in this case, 2. There's no 4-slot system, there's only a 2-slot system. So there's only both your arms and both your feet. Counted as a pair. So let's go back to the old system, okay? Let's just do that. Also, less in-game weapons, more secret weapons. One of the strangest things about Bayonetta 3 was the utilization of weapons and when you received them, because sometimes it made no sense. And I know what you're thinking, but Zach, it never made sense. Okay, well listen, Rodin gets a special type of music that can open a portal to a specific type of demonic monster. Yes, there is no explanation for that. It doesn't truly make sense. Then he whoops their ass and brings back a weapon based on the ass that was previously whooped. That's not what I mean here. I mean, you will go into right before the final boss fight or nearing the final boss fight, and the game decides to give you a brand new weapon from a demon you don't even fucking meet or know where it came from at all. Then, when you get to the final boss fight for your second playable character, Viola, somehow she gets that weapon. She finishes the fight where you get the weapon, but the game gives it to Bayonetta. So Viola essentially has only her default weapon loadout the entire game, but in exchange, hey, she gets a devil trigger, whoop-de-doo, or fairy trigger. I'm not gonna get on this story. Oh my god, I would make myself depressed. Essentially, I want Bayonetta as a playable character to get closer to her Bayonetta 2 counterpart, the holy grail of Bayonettas. Now, I guess we should move into the other playable characters. Well, let's start with Viola real quick. Completely erase her from the story and her presence. No, seriously. Damn! I don't want the character in Bayonetta 4. Now, in the case of John, there was a minigame tied to her, and her usability is basically restricted to, did you beat the game yet? And yet again, essentially being a direct copy of Bayonetta's entire loadout, but with the weapons having slightly altered designs and coloration. I'm gonna be honest, I kinda sorta hate that, but I like the idea of them adding another playable character. Here's what I raise you though. Keep John playable, keep the minigames, but have every single stage where Viola was supposed to show up, go get John. On top of going to get John, give her new moves and half the weapons Bayonetta got. If I'm counting correctly, Bayonetta got close to about 10 weapons total. 10. I'm including secret weapons. For those who aren't aware, they did bring back some old weapons as they did with every other previous title. Okay? Give them to John. Make them have story significance. Let her be more involved than a stealth minigame on a 2D plane in a 3D action beat 'em up. I couldn't make it up if I tried. Oh, and just in case anyone's wondering, yes, I did buy and play Bayonetta 3. As you know, I spoke to about it, and we even did a video about it, I believe, twice or once. We done either 2 or 3 Bayonetta videos. He even edited one for me. Viola needs to be erased. I know that sounds mean, or people think I want the character murdered. No, I don't want the character in Bayonetta 3 or 4. She is the type of character that needs to have a build-up, and she needs to be in game number 4, hinted at the end of 3, but be in game number 4 and set up some future story connection, or just be a DLC character and have a DLC issue and adventure. But again, I would still say give her more than one fucking weapon. My god, I hated playing that character. Anyways, so as far as the music, music's fine. Bayonetta's never had a music problem. The closest I would say there was to a Bayonetta music problem is a lot of their stuff sounds orchestrated, or it's an attempt at orchestral arrangements through synthetic means, but it always sounds extremely muffled. So even though you can enjoy the music, even with the volume set to max and other volumes lowered, it sounds very, very muffled. However, it could be from compression techniques that they're utilizing. I know it goes without saying, but when you play a video game, especially when it comes to the music's audio is usually compressed, because the music audio alone could be more than the game file size, depending on how many tracks there are. Now, Bayonetta 2 had around, I believe, 120 something tracks, so I understand it on some level. Now, one of my most technical sections. Now, I'm not going to use all the enemy names. I'm going to go by type or tier systems, because we're getting ready to talk about, well, who you fight against, the ops. Now for Bayonetta, I essentially say there's about 5 tiers of enemy. There is the quadrupedal, there is avian, there's a hybrid, which is either quadrupedal or avian, mixed with, being bipedal. There is a traditional humanoid size enemy, and then you got the brick shithouses when the enemies scale up to whatever size and whatever form. And we're going to throw in a 6 just now, the amorphous enemy, or enemies who don't conform to a traditional body shape or animal shape, or they do, but they also have some type of appendage that doesn't match. That happened a lot in Bayonetta 3. Okay, look, flat out, not going to lie to you. The biggest problem isn't the enemies and the enemy types. The biggest problems, as I hinted to earlier, is the enemy's ability to counteract the player. Let's break that down. When you play, and I'm going to bring this up again, Ninja Gaiden bosses, their basic combos alone, if not avoided properly, can take at a bare minimum 50 to 70% of your HP, no matter how much HP meter you have. It does not matter. Also, the bosses, when they block, do not take damage from the player. They don't. Techniques that would normally potentially be an easy instant kill or do a massive amount of damage on easy difficulty are practically impossible for a boss to be hit by. The game literally programs them to not be able to be caught by this in most situations. And that move is called the Flying Swallow. Ryu rolls into a ball, slashes somebody's head off, a flash shows up on screen, at least in the old games, and instant KO for lesser enemies. Speaking of the lesser enemies, they also, once they lose in ligament, have the option to suicide and try to take you with them. Pretty much almost every enemy. Literally, they will blow themselves up after trying to pin you or stab you. You will lose a lot of HP. Now, let's go into Bayonetta's bosses. They basically only have to worry about things when there's not slow-mo. When there is slow-mo, heavier bosses and heavier enemies get easier to pick up. They're vulnerable to throw and pull techniques. And also, you are going to be doing higher damage. And the only thing that has to happen besides doing the manual accessory that can do it in most games is you have to hit the dodge button, because Bayonetta does not block. Now in Bayonetta 2, combo strings could be interrupted because certain enemies had a holy shield that would show up. For those of you who know Yashesk or Yash, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, the reason that they went back from making video after video, combat after combat of Bayonetta 2 is because they didn't like that their combos could be retaliated against in that way. They could be shut down with a block. I'm personally okay with it, but there should be something besides that. If I know I'm fighting a bunch of ground enemies and they can't fly or they have wings but they're staying on the ground, and I pull someone in the air, scorpion style, and I start wailing on them until they basically rain down nothing but blood and feathers, you know, angelic type enemies. Why is it that almost nobody on the ground except for the trumpet playing version of these basic enemies try to do anything to hit me? No aerial stab, no, hey, let me fly up and try to help my homie out, or get together on the ground and do some giant team attack that can possibly knock me the fuck out the air. I can turn into a bird in the air. I can stay in the air. I can do homing feathers that don't miss once I launch them. I can turn into a fucking panther. And you know, well, in 3, you can turn into a demon hybridization version of your character based on the weapon that you're holding. But what can my enemies do? They can hit me with a sword arm, throw out a piddling energy beam, or spawn more of themselves if you get that little squid type enemy, or try to attack me because they're a giant amorphous blob thing or a giant humanoid thing. That's it. You see how these things do not match up? For every one ability, function, or feature that an enemy can do in the Bayonetta titles, but more specifically 3, Bayonetta has almost 10 options. That's not hyperbole. I count it. It's almost 10. Enemy attacks me. I can dodge. I can run away and transform into a panther. I can jump and turn or I can jump and turn into a bird. I can do a special move that essentially acts like a counter that can do a shit ton of damage. I can also summon a demon out, which has a little bit of a knockback. That's like 7 options right there. And we're talking default based Bayonetta, okay? Default based Bayonetta. Oh wait, and if you have your special weapons, she'll transform into a form that matches that weapon if you go into your double dodge. Do you see what I'm getting at? The character is evolving and progressing more dangerously than her enemies can keep up on every difficulty, because the difficulty determines the enemy's aggressiveness and attack damage, instead of giving the enemies access to more techniques, functionality that can make them combative to the player. Now, with that being said, as I've done with any build a game 2 cent out type video, besides keeping them under 30 minutes, which this one's going to be a little bit tough, the main goal is to point out the issues and fix them. So for anyone wondering, this video is not done with any malicious intent. I'm trying to be constructive, okay? I'm trying to be constructive. So I guess the last thing we can talk about is the story. Oh man, that's going to be real technical and long. Well, let me get started. Change the entire fucking story. Change the entire fucking story from beginning to end. Literally, don't try to make the story of 3 better. Make a different story for 4, okay? When you get to 4, which is the whole point of this video, trying to fix the mistakes of 3 so we can go into 4. Besides getting rid of Viola, The main thing that needs to be erased is the entire fucking story. Period. Absolutely period. Now, as far as what I would change it to, look, there's an element of lighthearted and there's an element of deeper technical stuff that always leads into future titles with the Bayonetta series, whether we knew it or not at the time. I'm not saying stop doing that. Look, if you want to cement the relationship with Bayonetta and the wolf guy, I know his name, I've started to respect him less and less every single game. Make it so there's some crisis that happens in game where he has to choose between essentially being some ladies man, pimp man hoe and actually having a committed relationship. Or fuck it, have Bayonetta tell him, look, you know why I don't like you? You're basically a male version of my best friend. Here, go get John. And John was like, oh, well, I would have been after him a long time ago. I just thought you wanted him. I was like, fuck out of here. Okay, that's how you get Viola being born at some point, whatever. Make it something simple and explore elements that we normally have questions about. We've been told that Rodon is the most powerful character in the franchise, outside of maybe the last bosses of each individual game. And we've also been told that there is only one Rodon in all of Infinity. Okay? His nickname in one of the games is even the Infinite One. How about Rodon makes a weapon for Bayonetta and he magically just starts having a heart attack, convulsing, or his body starts looking like it's deteriorating. And then over time you find out, oh, there's some great mythical force that's attacking him because they want to erase Rodon from history because they feel like his meddling with different dimensions and demons and angels is going to lead to some great cataclysm we don't know about. And that's how you incorporate Viola. Viola knows about that cataclysm. Viola doesn't want to tell anybody, and neither do the final enemies, because the cataclysm is based on the primary main cast and supporting cast of Bayonetta. Okay? And then Lumen Sages, who were in hiding, show up. So now we have a playable Lumen Sage, we have Bayonetta, we have Jean, and then we have Viola. And then later on in the game, maybe at the halfway point or as a secret unlockable, we get a playable Rodon with his own small story mode from the events before the game happened and nearing the end when he's fully revived, even if he's not at full power. See how simple that was? It doesn't need to be complex. It can have depth. It can have emotional strong ties. It can have brevity. It doesn't need to be complex. It just need to not suck like Bayonetta 3's did. So spoiler time, if you can call it that, for those of you who didn't play 3. Not only is Bayonetta's story not correctly coherent due to how the story is presented and the cutscenes and the lack of explanation, even in written dialogue and material assets inside of the game itself once you beat it, Bayonetta dies, supposedly comes back, and we don't even get an explanation as to how it happened. So the players basically made to think Bayonetta died. Oh, and then they do a dance sequence at the credits because you're supposed to be happy right now? I get it, they did it in the first game. Well, the first game had a decent ending. They did it in the second game. Well, the second game had a decent ending. They did it in the third game. What the actual fuck is wrong with you? That's like dancing on someone's grave at this point. Oh, and I guess as far as new features or functionality, oh man, that's such a technical list. I wonder what they should do for Bayonetta 4. Co-op. Legitimate fucking co-op. It doesn't have to be the whole game. Maybe just have it to where once you beat the game, you can play the game with a friend. Offline co-op, online co-op, I don't care. Okay? I don't care. It was cool when you had the little online co-op mode in Bayonetta 1, or was it just 2? We loved it. Bring that shit back. Matter of fact, why don't you tie some exclusive skins or unlockables to it? And as an added bonus, I guess, for DLC, look, you don't need to expand on the story. Maybe just, like I said, a expanded Rodon mode. But really, use it as an excuse to bring back old weapons. And maybe give them some modern updates. I really want Saifong back. I want Saifong back. The nunchucks that can ricochet and shoot out bullets. Oh my god, I love that shit. And I'm sure other people love other weapons. If you want to give them an update, I don't care. And make all those DLC weapons usable between the characters and give them different moves lists. That would be cool. But yeah, that's just what's rambling in my head in the 2 cent aisle. I'll see you guys in the next one.
Moon river, wider than mine. I'm crossing you in style someday. Oh, dream maker, you heartbreak.
Don't be such a heartbreak.
Wherever you're going, go with see such a dwell the same roses waiting round by huckleberry friend.